Marker. And action.
This is Behind the Bells, the show that takes you behind the magic of your favorite Christmas movies and shows. Within the background of every Santa Claus, reindeer, and stocking is a story. Where did it come from? Our Christmas movie expert will unravel all of that and give you the full story. Sit back and enjoy another episode with Robert Nicholas.
Merry Monday, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Bells. I'm your host, Robert Nicholas, and I'll be taking you on another one-horse open sleigh ride into the world of Christmas movies. 80s and 90s kids may remember a character named Ernest P. Worrell. Parents of those kids have either chuckled or recoiled at the guy. Anyone born after 2000 may not even know who he is at all. As someone who was born in 1987, I can say that I knew very well of Ernest. I don't know if I can call him a great character, but he had an impact on my childhood. He was the redneck equivalent of a clown. A clown that wasn't that bright and would mess up any situation, but also carried a childlike sense of naivete. He was always excited for whatever he was asked to do. This ranged from promoting Mellow Yellow over Mountain Dew, convincing himself that he's brave enough to conquer Splash Mountain, and yes, there was a television special called Ernest Goes to Splash Mountain, and even proving his superiors that he could be seen as a responsible camp counselor. For a character who had a limited time of fame, he managed to get a lot out, and to cover it all would take up way too much time. So, given the Christmas theme of my show, I wanted to look over the second movie of his, not to mention the first movie I saw him in, Ernest Saves Christmas. So keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times. Let's go for a ride. Ernest Saves Christmas is something. It's certainly a movie that feels like something that it wanted to be. Something that's incredibly silly and goofy. After all, the plot revolves around the current Santa Claus, played by Douglas Seal, as he comes to Orlando, Florida, in order to pass the job to the man that he feels is right. No, it's not Ernest, but rather a former children's television host, Joe Carruthers, played by Oliver Clark, who's facing a midlife crisis as he's not sure how to proceed forward with his acting career. It just so happens that as soon as Santa flies into Florida, not in a sleigh, but now on the defunct Eastern Airlines, he gets picked up by a cab driver, Ernest, played by Jim Varney. The two chat, and Ernest doesn't see him as Santa yet, but rather as a nice man who says to be Santa. Perhaps this was meant to be a little tribute to Miracle on 34th Street, or at least to prove that Ernest isn't a complete moron. While on the road, they also pick up a teenage runaway, Harmony Starr, played by Noelle Parker, whose role seems to be the movie's attempt to speak to the hip and cool audience. Someone that older kids can look up to, just in case they already felt too old for the more silly Ernest. The rest of the movie plays out like a series of events gone wrong. Santa gets dropped off to meet Joe, but leaves his magic sack in the cab. Ernest doesn't realize the sack is magic until later that evening. When Santa goes around telling people he's Santa, he ends up getting arrested. Ernest becomes determined to find Santa, but has no clue where he is. And on top of all of that, Joe is being kept away from Santa by his talent agent, Marty, played by Robert Lesser. Oh, and there happens to be a side story involving a Laurel and Hardy-like duo who are responsible for Santa's reindeer when they're delivered by crates to the airport. There's a lot in the movie that makes no sense. Why would Santa wait until the last day on Christmas Eve to try and turn the job over to someone else? Why not show off more magic to prove he wasn't lying? Why not just use his original name, Seth Applegate, when he's going out in public? Why would Christmas end forever if Santa didn't pass on his title? Would anything be missed from the plot if Harmony was cut from the movie? And finally, did Ernest learn anything at all after the whole experience? A lot of people don't note this, but with the other movies like Ernest Goes to Camp, Ernest Goes to Jail, and yes, even Ernest Scared Stupid, Ernest at least goes through a character arc in which he seems to grow a little. In the case of Ernest Saves Christmas, the story really isn't about Ernest. If anything, he's the catalyst for the people involved. He's the one who takes Santa to Joe. He's the one who tries to return the magic sack to its rightful owner. He's the one who has to get the sleigh and reindeer to Santa in order to complete the job transition. But overall, he's still the same goofy redneck who wants to feel like he belongs. With everything that I just said, you'd think that I'd hate this movie. But to be honest, not only is it a guilty pleasure, but it is a guilty pleasure I am guaranteed to watch once every December. I'm sure you're wondering why. Why is this something I watch over and over, even with its flaws? Well, to be honest, a lot of it is nostalgia. Like I said, the first time I saw an Ernest movie was with Ernest Saves Christmas. I recall watching it for the first time when I was on vacation. It was around the late 90s when my family was staying at the Disneyland Hotel after spending a day at the happiest place on earth. It was also the early December time frame. As my family, it had always been tradition to make the annual trip to Disneyland each Christmas season. It had been an exhausting day, and yet only my parents had fallen asleep. So, like I typically do when I can't sleep, I turned on the television and browsed around. When I reached the Disney Channel, I came across Ernest, dressed as a filthy farmer, with Santa in his truck bed, trying to get into a film studio to deliver a truckload of snakes for them horror movie folk. Given I was around 9 or 10, I was laughing. I liked his impersonation, not knowing that Jim Varney was noted for his impersonations. I also happen to like this movie's Santa, even though never at one point does he put on the iconic red suit. I even liked the Florida setting. Maybe it was because I had seen so many snowbound Christmas movies that it was just a nice change in pace. From that point on, I wanted to catch the other Ernest movies as well. I never got them on VHS, but they were always available to rent at Blockbuster. I watched the others like Ernest Goes to Camp and Ernest Goes to Jail, and thought they were fine. Even as a kid, I never saw the Ernest movies as my favorites. But given that my favorite comedian was Jim Carrey, I guess I got a thing for actors who like to mug. I would always find Ernest Saves Christmas on the Disney Channel all the time. So again, there wasn't a reason to get the tape. It just remains something I watched every December up until college. Now, I saw it again a few years later, and it's something I still like, even to this day. Yeah, I know the movie is stupid. Okay, really stupid. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I also know that it was aiming to make its core audience laugh. Children. Does that mean Ernest wasn't for adults? No. In fact, Ernest got to start doing commercials for a family audience more than anything. In fact, he was popular enough that by the time Ernest Saves Christmas was in theaters, he had a massive fan club. So, I wanted to explore the history of Ernest Saves Christmas. But in order to do so, I feel it's important to show how Ernest came to be. How Jim Varney struggled for years to get acting work before becoming the character. How Disney CEO Michael Eisner discovered that Ernest just might have been more popular than Mickey Mouse. But I also wanted to showcase how a group of people from Nashville could suddenly be sitting next to the biggest stars in Hollywood. How John Cherry went from an advertising business owner to a filmmaker. How shooting in Florida was such a big launch into turning Florida into Hollywood East. So, let's ring out the bells and take a look at the history behind Ernest Saves Christmas. Before Jim Varney became Ernest, he was born and raised in Kentucky, where it was clear that even at a young age, he wanted to be an actor. His parents already saw him as gifted when he was known for being able to memorize poems, monologues, and entire passages of books. He wouldn't just recite them, he would break into character voices and even read them in different accents. He would really want to entertain his family and friends, but more importantly, he wanted to make everyone smile. It wouldn't be long before the theater became the right outlet. He would perform anything from playing Ebenezer Scrooge in high school to Shakespeare in community theater, all before he was 19. Now, given your expectations of Jim Varney from the Ernest movies, you'd expect him to be hammy, over the top, and trying to mug as much as possible just to get a laugh. Even I was surprised that he took classical theater very seriously. But I guess this shows how much the character of Ernest would eventually cement. It would end up sticking with him in the eyes of a ton of people, but I'm getting ahead of myself. According to fellow performers, he would study his acting, tone, dictation, concentration, pretty much everything about his performance all the time. He was already known for having a great sense of humor, but he really wanted to be seen as the most talented actor in all of Kentucky. But he knew that that one state was too small for his aspirations. His endgame was Broadway, and he took on as much as he could to add on to his resume. This also included doing shows like Carnival and Bye Bye Birdie. He also got a lot of performance time by working at the Nashville-based theme park Opryland, where he played a local old man even though he was 23. Another outlet was in Old West Village, where he got to show off his knife-throwing skills while playing a variety of characters from sheriffs to bandits to in-town drunks. This is also where I think he saw his joy of entertaining children. Not that you couldn't do that in the theater, but the thing with theme parks is that performers are always going to want to make families laugh more than anything. It's a place where an over-the-top personality will work to an advantage because the environment is already exaggerated. If a well-constructed Wild West jail is present, then you're going to want to play up the fantasy with an over-the-top gunslinger. He didn't just restrict himself to theater and theme parks, he also saw television as a fantastic way to get his face out there. It was around 1972 when a talent agent referred to him to John Cherry. This is the same John Cherry that would eventually direct Ernest Saves Christmas, but in the meantime was then a co-owner of a Nashville-based advertising company, the Cardin and Cherry Advertising Agency. He was aware of Varney's talent and knew he had a gift for impersonations. He was given more work than he knew what to do with. On top of playing a military comedy character named Sergeant Glory for a number of commercials, Varney was continuing to do stand-up work, going as far as opening for various rock bands like Blood, Sweat, and Tears, and even making a temporary move to LA to give Hollywood a shot. They say that in order to make that step, you have to give up a big part of your personality. Varney was not as keen on playing that game. Even with all the work on his lap, he never wanted to let go of his roots. His Kentucky background was something he liked to draw upon as a part of his personality. But what he saw as a valuable asset, casting agents saw as too limiting and Midwestern for a coastal audience. He did get some work and even kept his friend, Johnny Cash, yes, the Ring of Fire singer Johnny Cash, up to date as much as possible. Though Varney still hadn't found the one. He had yet to find the role that would take advantage of his skills and comedy. The one was about to hit him harder than he ever expected. In 1980, Ernest made his first appearance in a John Cherry created commercial for a now defunct theme park in Kentucky called Beach Bend Park. The place was going through a renovation and needed new commercials, but because the construction wasn't done yet, they were not allowed to show the park. Hence the ad would consist of a new character, a naive redneck named Ernest, who would be telling his silent neighbor, Vern, about Beach Bend. They apparently couldn't afford another actor to play Vern, so the camera and the audience would be Vern. This became an eternal running gag, and honestly, a clever way to work around a tight budget. The commercial was a big hit, not for the theme park, which would end up closing the next year, but for Ernest the character. People, especially families, found him very likable. John Cherry's company was getting calls from other businesses that wanted more Ernest. Since the original commercial was meant for the Kentucky area, Ernest primarily got his start around the southern and midwestern states. He was hired for a variety of products ranging from local milk to ice cream to natural gas to convenience stores.
You know, Vern, Laclede natural gas is such a hot, fast, cheap way to heat your home and cook them fancy foods you're so fond of that it has inspired me to write this poem. I affectionately call it Natural Gas by Ernest P. Worrell. Well, actually, it's by Laclede. I just wrote the words. Roses are red, violets are blue, natural gas comes from Laclede and right to your basement. Hey, Vern, where have you been? What you doing in that big-time fancy supermarket, huh? It ain't cool, Vern. It ain't convenient either, know what I mean? You know, Vern, everybody's in there cashing checks. The express lane's backed up way up past ground beef, and you had to park way over there in the lower 40, you know what I mean? Convenient food mart, Vern. How about a black top omelet, know what I mean? Ho, Vern. It's me, Ernest, Sandy's little party helper. And look what I brought you, some chips and party dips and everything.
Merry Christmas,
You know, Vern,
Vern.
it's that time of year when people get together to celebrate with their friends and have a good time. And, hey, look, Vern, there's Ken and Craig and Jerry. It looks like the whole Channel 40, Channel 29 2 center team is here. Hey, listen, Vern, if you need any more chips or anything, I'm right next door. It's no trouble at all. Just give me a call. Merry Christmas, Vern.
It seemed that people couldn't get enough of the goofy guy. Now, there was concern that Ernest would be viewed as too rural and wouldn't cater to a national audience. Because of that, Jim Varney continued his stand-up and attempted to acquire more television roles. Those additional roles, along with the Ernest commercials, made him out as one of the very first viral stars. We live in an era of social media where outlets like YouTube and Instagram can make someone famous in a heartbeat. Because of that, fame happens a lot faster than ever. The downside is that fame can also disappear faster. When something unique happens, then the next unique thing will knock it off in a heartbeat. This is likely why before the internet was a thing, trends tended to drift longer. Limited platforms meant a limited capacity of new ideas, new products, and of course, new characters. This may be why the 1980s was also one of the last periods for commercials to have longer lifespans. Wendy's had the Where's the Beef Lady, Domino's had the Noid, but everyone had Ernest. But now that everyone knew who Ernest was, would they know who Jim Varney was? I'll let you know after a short break.
And now back to the show with our Christmas movie expert, Robert Nicholas.
Though I'll go into more detail next week, Varney was about to face a new problem of being too well known as Ernest. Ernest didn't slow down at all during the 80s. In fact, he was given his own hour-long TV special in 1983 called Know What I Mean? Hey Vern, it's my family album, which used Ernest to frame a series of sketches starring Varney as he played a variety of other characters. At around the same time, merchandising became a major commodity. It was around here in which the character's quote-unquote kid-friendly appeal was cemented, with John Cherry being careful about not putting Ernest in adult products or any ads that couldn't be marketed to children. This also led to his first movie. No, not Ernest Goes to Camp, but Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Bean. You have to love a movie that tries to pitch a strange title along with a strange movie. I haven't been able to watch it, but according to friends, they've described it as something a Monty Python fan would love if it wasn't bizarre enough. Before you seek it out, you should know that Ernest is not even that big of a character, but rather one of many characters also played by Varney. It got a small release in the Midwest, but couldn't justify a nationwide release after poor reviews and a poor gross. A lot of people would wonder why the first Ernest movie would want to attempt something very offbeat, a complete opposite of the future Ernest movies by Disney. My theory is that Jim Varney wanted to try out a variety of other characters to showcase his ability to step away from Ernest. The solution to that would have been to pick a project that Ernest was not in, but it was clear that director John Cherry didn't want to take that chance. In fact, the poster for Dr. Otto has a full picture of Ernest looking at a tangled pile of film strip, looking for something. Perhaps this was a metaphor for his character trying to find his cinematic voice. Even if his first movie wasn't his launching pad, he may have not even needed it to launch further. His commercials were still doing incredibly well. In fact, he had already started to make personal appearances at malls and parades where Varney was cheered by children and adults as big kids that wanted to see him in person. This would cultivate in 1985 when Varney was scheduled to appear at the Indy 500. Yes, that Indy 500 race. Before each major race, there is an outdoor festival where people can have fun like a carnival. It's also a great opportunity for sponsors to showcase their products. One of those sponsors was an Indianapolis-based set of dealerships that was another business that used Ernest in their ads. Another sponsor at the race was Disney. The 1985 theme of the festival happened to be The Wonderful World of Disney. Keep in mind that Disney was still in its recovery phase. Michael Eisner was the company's CEO, but the future was still in flux. The Walt Disney Studios was still at a point where they were seriously considering shuttering their animation division. It was then riding off on nostalgia, which isn't too far off from how they make their money today, but that's a discussion for another day. Disney still knew that nostalgia was a moneymaker, and that Mickey Mouse was one of their commodities that was a safe bet. He could draw a crowd. The company could still show his old shorts and gain new fans. So it was at the 1985 Indy Festival in which Mickey Mouse was the Grand Marshal. Like every year, the parade was filled with fans who happily enjoyed each float, getting a chance to see certain celebrities. When Mickey Mouse came along, people cheered and shouted. But when Ernest came up next, he got an even bigger cheer, and even people screaming. Varney's guest appearance wasn't part of his contract with the car dealerships. He was not the Grand Marshal, or even a special guest. He was another commercial character who just happened to reach immense popularity. This didn't go unnoticed by Michael Eisner, who was watching from the stands. To quote him directly, "I was at the Indianapolis 500, and there was a parade. 500,000 people were there. The governor went by, and applause. Mickey Mouse went by, and more applause. And all of a sudden, Jim Varney went by as Ernest, and the 500,000 people went berserk. So I said, we gotta do something about it." Eisner invited Cherry to Burbank, where it was discussed that there was a desire to expand Ernest further into the movies. Like I said, Dr. Otto was a flop that was also an independent movie. But there was also the issue that Ernest had not seen a lot of airtime on either coast. Disney was about to change that with a 3-picture deal set. Over the next few years, Ernest would not only find even more commercials that gave him attention, but he also got popular enough that he had a fan club. There was even a book to go with it called Ernest P. Worrell's Book of Knowledge, which, according to Varney, it's not a big book. We're not talking War and Peace. We're talking more like a pamphlet. It was in 1987 that Disney released the first Ernest movie on a nationwide scale, Ernest Goes to Camp. It would be the next year that they would make Ernest Saves Christmas. So next week, we'll go into detail about how both movies were still produced like independent films despite having Disney backing them. We'll go into one of Florida's first big productions back when several companies had hoped to turn Florida into Hollywood East. We'll also talk about why I still enjoy the movie to this day, even though I know it has genuine problems that prevent it from being an actual good movie. There's plenty to get to, so I'll give you a break. I will see you all until then.
Thank you for joining us on this sleigh ride into the magical world of Christmas movies. Check us out for weekly rides into your favorite Christmas classics and their histories. Be sure to give us a positive review on iTunes if you like what you heard. And don't forget to follow us on social media on Facebook and Instagram for updates and special news. Consider subscribing on Patreon in order to help keep the show going and to gain access to some special gifts not available to the public. Merry Monday to all, and to all a good night. See you next week.
Cut. Okay, everybody, that's a wrap.